CEO's wife invited a black cleaning lady for a joke, but what happened next was life-changing. Margaret stood in the grand living room of her opulent Willow Creek home, where sunlight danced through crystal chandeliers and spilled onto the polished marble floor. The laughter of her well-heeled friends filled the air, a sweet sound that had come to represent the monotony of her life. She blessedly ignored the emptiness that gnawed at her from the inside. Each surface was polished as meticulously as her perfect life, but cracks were starting to form. Feeling spontaneous, Margaret made a choice one fateful afternoon. She invited Ruth, the determined single mother who cleaned her house, to join their monthly brunch. Her friends would delight in the novelty, she figured. But deep down, Margaret was searching for something more. Perhaps a hint of connection that felt severely lacking in her privileged bubble. When Ruth arrived, dressed neatly but modestly, it felt like a breath of fresh air amid the perfumed, diamond-laden women who crowded around their chipped wine glasses. Nothing could have prepared Ruth for the social minefield she would encounter. The jokes started harmlessly enough, however, they soon twisted into sharp barbs, draped in ignorance and prejudice. The laughter rang hollow, growing louder as each joke cut deeper, weighing down on Ruth as a reminder of her struggles. An innocent evening became a suffocating experience. Margaret's friends were blind to Ruth's pain, each laugh an accusation that illuminated their illusion of superiority. Every casual comment echoed like a gunshot in the silence of Ruth's heart, revealing the widening chasm between their lives. She clenched her jaw, fighting against the urge to flee, stinging tears obscuring her vision. Suddenly, with a courage she hadn't known she possessed, Ruth stood. "My husband fought for this country," she said, the weight of her voice pulling every eye toward her. The room, previously filled with giggles and condescension, now held a heavy silence. "He served, and I'm raising our kids in his memory while cleaning houses to keep food on the table. I am more than a cleaning lady. I am a proud mother." As she spoke, a spark ignited within her, a fire fueled by heartbreak, dignity, and resolution. Margaret's friends turned pale, caught off guard. Ruth's truth was a blow to their delicate perceptions, that an air of privilege could justify mockery. But just when it seemed they might finally listen, one woman waved Ruth's narrative away, crushing the moment under the weight of scorn. Ruth's eyes blazed, a mix of anger and determination swirling within them. She felt the world fade around her as she left the room, her heart thudding loudly against her chest. "Before we continue, I need to let you know about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, hit that bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can drop a like, it really helps me with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen." "Now let's continue," the gathering faltered, with muffled whispers and hesitant glances exchanged. Margaret, struck by the raw truth of Ruth's words and the subsequent dismissal, felt a storm brewing in her heart. She could cling to the comfort of her friends, or she could choose to stand up and challenge their attitudes. Was it marriage, luxury, and social status that defined her? Or was it the moral courage to do what was right, one conversation at a time? In that breathless moment, a question loomed over Margaret's heart: could she be the one to tear down that invisible wall and bring their worlds together? Meanwhile, Ruth's voice, laced with resolve, echoed through the silence, leaving behind a lingering tension that suggested something far deeper was brewing. Margaret stood frozen for a moment, the laughter of her friends now a faint echo compared to the pulse of her racing heart. She glanced around the room, searching for familiar faces transformed by guilt and realization. The air felt thick, charged with unspoken words and uncomfortable truths. Each minute that ticked by felt like an eternity as she weighed the consequences of her next move. She pushed through the crowd, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Her mind was swirling with thoughts about Ruth's abrupt departure. How could her friends be so insensitive? A knot of shame twisted in her stomach as she recalled Ruth's fierce declaration, "I am more than a cleaning lady." Those words reverberated in her mind as though Ruth had possessed a magical ability to expose her own misconceptions. "Margaret, are you okay?" One of her friends, Jennifer, raised an eyebrow, her voice dripping with confusion. "Did you mean for this to turn out like this?" Another chimed in, the scorn evident. Margaret felt a surge of anger rise within her. She couldn't take it anymore. "What is wrong with you? Did you even hear what she said?" Silence fell, each pair of eyes boring into her, wide with surprise. With an almost reckless abandon, she shook her head. "It's time we stop thinking we're better than others just because of our circumstances. Life isn't a joke. Ruth is fighting harder than any of us for what truly matters." Her voice broke slightly at the end, punctuating her vulnerability. The silence grew heavy, each glimmering chandelier casting shadows over their shocked expressions. "Margaret, calm down," Jennifer said, her disdain unmasked. "This isn't the place, why not?" She retorted, feeling untethered as she continued, "Why shouldn't we talk about this? Why shouldn't we care?" The flicker of her own courage inspired a persistent flame inside. It pushed her toward the door, her heart guiding her steps down the grand hallway. She burst out into the crisp air, desperately hoping to catch a glimpse of Ruth, but the street was quiet, save for the faint rustle of leaves whispering in the wind. Ruth was gone. Panic threatened to swallow her whole. What if she never had a chance to apologize? What if the words of one woman prevented her from understanding the life lessons waiting just outside of her gilded cage? Without hesitation, Margaret reached for her phone, her thumb hovering over Ruth's contact. She paused, the pulse of uncertainty stuttering in her veins. What could she say? Would Ruth even want to hear from her after the way things ended? Pushing the thoughts aside, she pressed call, her heart pounding as she waited, each tone echoing her urgent need for connection. It rang, once, twice, 3 times. Just when she thought it would go to voicemail, she heard a breathy answer. "Hello? Ruth, it's Margaret," she blurted out, breathless and slightly frantic. "I need to talk to you. I messed up." "Margaret," Ruth replied, a mixture of surprise and caution evident in her voice. "I'm so sorry for what happened," she rushed on, "you deserve to be treated with respect. Please, can we meet? Can I make it right?" The pause felt enormous on the other end, then Ruth spoke softly, yet firmly. "I don't know, Margaret. I need time. Time." The word hung thick between them, but Margaret could feel a glimmer of hope. She had stepped onto a bridge, a connection was forming, fragile yet unbreakable. "Just know, Ruth, I want to understand. I don't want to be part of the problem anymore," Margaret pleaded, her voice laced with sincerity. "All right, I'll think about it." Ruth's reply was cautious but still held a promise, a potential light in an unexpected darkness. As Margaret hung up, she looked at the horizon, where the sky transformed into shades of hope and possibility. This was just the beginning. How would their lives intersect next? She felt the stirring of transformation, something that would not just change her, but could perhaps create a ripple that spread much further. But the real question loomed: what would it take to truly change the hearts around her? And would she find the strength to face the complexities that lay ahead? Margaret took a deep breath, feeling the crisp evening air fill her lungs. The night enveloped her in a comforting, cool embrace. She knew she needed to move, needed to act. Standing in front of her beautifully lit home, a place filled with all the right things, she felt an aching emptiness. Was this place truly her sanctuary, or just another gilded cage? As her feet carried her down the street, she fought with conflicting thoughts. What kind of friend had she been? Was she simply another face in the sea of privilege, oblivious to the struggles around her? She had been so caught up in her own world that it took Ruth's outburst to shake her into awareness. A sense of urgency flared within her. She couldn't let things linger. She needed to explain herself, to show Ruth that she was willing to learn and grow. But what if it was too late? What if Ruth didn't want to forgive her, determined not to let fear steer her path, Margaret found herself wandering toward Ruth's building. It was a modest structure, strikingly in contrast to the opulence she was accustomed to. But for some reason, it filled her with a sense of purpose. With each step, she imagined what she would say, rehearsing her words like lines in a play. When she reached the entrance, she hesitated. Her heart raced as she pressed the doorbell, the sound echoing in her ears. Seconds felt like hours before she heard footsteps approaching. The door opened, revealing a slightly bewildered Ruth, her hair tousled and eyes wide with surprise. "Margaret? What are you doing here?" Ruth's voice was cautious but not unwelcoming. I needed to see you," Margaret stammered. "I know I hurt you, and I just wanted to say how sorry I am. I want to understand. Can we talk?" Ruth bit her lip, uncertainty shadowing her features. "I really don't know, Margaret. I'm not sure what else there is to say. Please, just give me a chance," Margaret pleaded, her voice trembling. "I want to hear your story, really hear it. I want to be a better friend. I don't want my actions to define who I am." After a long pause, Ruth's expression softened. "All right. Let us talk, but you have to promise to listen." They settled on a nearby park bench surrounded by whispers of rustling leaves and distant laughter. A poignant stillness fell over them, encapsulating their moment. Margaret felt a sense of urgency, every second counted, and she didn't want to waste it. "So, what do you want to know?" Ruth began, her voice steady, bringing a new gravity to their conversation. Margaret's heart raced as she searched for her words. "I want to know about your life, what it means to you. Not just the surface stuff. I want to understand what you fight against every day." As Ruth spoke, Margaret was drawn into the stories painted with struggle, ambition, and resilience. Each word struck a chord deep inside her. She could feel her heart swelling, breaking, and stitching itself back together as Ruth shared the painful reality of being judged, overlooked, and underestimated. It was uncomfortable and beautiful all at once. Margaret knew this wasn't just a conversation, it was a turning point. For every ounce of shame she'd felt in the past, there was now growing strength, a resolve to do better, to advocate for others like Ruth who had been treated unfairly. "I can't believe I ever thought I was above anyone," Margaret admitted quietly. "I realize now that everyone's journey is important, and I want to help bridge that gap." Ruth nodded, acknowledging the sincerity in Margaret's voice. "It's going to take time, Margaret. Change doesn't happen overnight. But having the right intentions is a start." As they continued talking, laughter eventually replaced the heaviness. Moments of lightness intertwined with their raw honesty, illuminating the potential of their friendship, but just as hope filled the space between them, a text pinged on Ruth's phone. She glanced down, her expression shifting dramatically. Margaret noticed the tension return, the easy conversation disrupted. "What is it?" Margaret asked, sensing the weight of the moment. Ruth hesitated, her eyes now clouded with worry. "It's about work, I need to go." Her words hung heavy in the air. The evening's potential began to unravel, and Margaret could feel a weight pressing down on both of them. What was about to unfold could shake this fragile connection they had begun to build. "Wait. Can I come with you?" Margaret blurted, urgency creeping back in. Ruth looked torn. "You really don't have to, but this time," Margaret was resolute. She couldn't let their moment slip away, not when it felt like stepping into a new chapter of understanding. "Please, let me be there," she insisted. As Ruth sighed, contemplating the request, Margaret knew the real challenge was just beginning. The unpredictable road ahead of them filled with doubts, fears, and the potential for real change. Would Ruth allow her to be part of that journey, or was she stepping into a world she didn't yet understand? As Ruth stared at Margaret, time seemed to hang between them. A tug-of-war of emotions played across her face, and Margaret held her breath, willing Ruth to say yes. Finally, with a slight nod and a resigned sigh, Ruth answered. "All right. But just know, this is serious." The two women walked in sync, side by side but worlds apart. Ruth's mind raced with the implications of her job. Her recent struggles weighed heavily on her, and the last thing she wanted was for Margaret to see the grim realities that came with her work. But deep down, a flicker of hope ignited. Could this be a step toward real friendship? They arrived at the office, a stark contrast to the park's warmth. The building loomed tall, chrome glass reflecting the street's hustle and bustle. Spotting Ruth's co-workers bustling about, Margaret felt the knot of anxiety tighten in her stomach. What had she gotten herself into? Inside, the atmosphere was charged, phones ringing, people shouting across cubicles, and an air of urgency that enveloped them. Ruth immediately shifted into work mode, her shoulders tense, her demeanor professional. "I'll just be a minute," she said, her tone brisk as she headed to the break room. Margaret lingered, unsure of where to go. She caught snippets of conversations around her. Some laughter, but mostly a flurry of complaints and deadlines. It deeply contrasted with everything she had just heard from Ruth. Margaret felt like an interloper in this world, while Ruth dealt with whatever crisis lay hidden behind those break room doors. Margaret turned her attention to the scene unfolding before her. Her heart sank as she watched Ruth's co-workers interact, their tones dripping with superiority and self-importance. Conversations about expensive wines and lavish vacations filled the air, all while Ruth kept her head down, a faint shadow of frustration mixed with determination. Then something unexpected happened. A group gathered near Ruth's desk, loudly discussing their latest venture, and one of them, a tall blonde with an extravagant handbag, glanced toward the break room. Can you believe Ruth wanted to bring her friend along? What was her name? The cleaning lady? Laughter erupted, casually dismissing Ruth's struggle. Margaret's blood boiled. Suddenly, the earlier connection she felt with Ruth ignited a fierce sense of protection. This was more than a casual comment, it was a sharp knife aimed at a woman trying her best in a forsaken space. She gripped her phone tightly, her mind racing. Did she have the courage to challenge this laughter, to stand up for her friend? Ruth emerged from the break room, her expression a mix of exasperation and resolve. She hadn't heard the conversation, but Margaret had. It was now or never. "Excuse me," Margaret announced, stepping forward, her voice steady as she confronted the group. "I don't think it's fair to talk about Ruth this way. She's incredible at her job and deserves respect, no matter her title." All eyes turned toward her, surprise and disbelief woven into their expressions. The laughter faltered, replaced by an uncomfortable silence. Ruth's eyes widened, filled with both gratitude and fear. "Margaret, you don't have to," but Margaret wouldn't back down. She took a breath, fueled by passion. "Yes, I do. We've got to do better. Everyone's story matters, sometimes beyond what we see on the surface." In that moment of vulnerability, Margaret recognized an old yearning within her, a desire for true connection based on understanding, for real conversations beyond forms and walls. The room felt smaller, the voices around them suddenly hushed. As Margaret stood firmly, Ruth's emotions played across her face, a mix of shock, relief, and disbelief. Would this be the moment that altered the dynamics between them all? But just as resilience sparked hope, the tension shifted again. From the back of the room, a voice piped up. "You're just a guest, after all. Don't speak too loudly, or you might get kicked out." The words were a punch to the gut, reminding Margaret of how quickly support could turn to dismissal. And just like that, the whispers returned, mocking and insidious. Margaret's heart raced. Would Ruth step forward to claim her space in a world that threatened to swallow both of them whole? The fragile alliance they built hung in the balance as the glimmer of hope began to dim in the face of reality. Maybe it's not just about what we say, Margaret thought, anxiety intertwining with a reluctant fight. Perhaps the change we seek has to start right here. As the sound of laughter and gossip filled the air again, Margaret silently vowed to fight this battle for Ruth and for herself. But what would that mean for their friendship? And as those questions circled in Margaret's mind, the world outside faded, leaving only the weight of what was still to come. Would she have the courage to face the challenge ahead, or was this the beginning of unraveling everything she had tried to build? Margaret stood there, heart pounding, as the mockery resumed around her. The laughter of Ruth's colleagues felt like a physical blow. Each chuckle pricked at her resolve, and she could almost see the door closing on the connection they had just begun to build. The uncertainty of the moment thickened the air between them. Would Ruth dare to stand up for herself, or would she retreat, as she had done so many times before? "Margaret," Ruth said softly, her eyes searching. "Please, let's just go." But there was a fire in Margaret now, one that sparked from the depths of her own struggles. She knew all too well what it felt like to be the target of disdain, to be dismissed as less than adequate. "No," she replied, a steely determination settling in her voice. "You deserve better." Ruth swallowed hard, glancing between Margaret and the group of mocking co-workers. Fear flickered in her eyes, but gradually, it was replaced by something else, something that hinted at courage. "You're right," Ruth whispered, her voice stronger now. "I'm done letting them dictate my worth." Margaret felt that spark ignite into a flame. She stepped closer to Ruth, holding her gaze steady. "We start here. Together," she affirmed, gripping Ruth's arm with a sense of camaraderie, a silent pledge to stand united against the tide of rejection. As the laughter faded, Ruth took a deep breath, finally allowing herself to be seen. "You think my worth is in what I do or what I earn?" She addressed the group deliberately, and her voice grew more assertive. "Let me tell you, my value comes from who I am and how I treat others. Humor at the expense of someone else isn't funny. It says more about you than it does about me." The room held its breath. The smug smiles froze, and some averted their eyes. It was a moment of reckoning, and Margaret felt the weight shift. She could almost see the walls Ruth had built around herself beginning to crumble. "Maybe we need to reflect on what we say and how it impacts the people around us," Ruth continued, her conviction growing stronger with each word. "You might hide behind your jokes, but I'm standing here, exposed, and I'm no less worthy than any of you." There was a ripple of surprise among the onlookers. The group exchanged glances, whispers of disbelief softening their arrogance. Margaret's heart swelled with pride for Ruth. This was the woman she had sensed beneath the surface, the fighter longing to break free from her cage. Just then, a voice broke through the tension. "This is ridiculous," the blonde from before huffed, arms crossed and defiantly unimpressed. "We're all just trying to have fun. You seriously think this is some sort of big deal? What's fun for you can be devastating for someone else," Margaret shot back, anger tinging her voice. "Maybe it's time to rethink your definition of fun." The unease in the room was palpable as the conversation turned. Ruth looked over at Margaret, gratitude shining in her eyes. They were no longer just two women from different lives, now they were allies in a shared battle for dignity and understanding. As murmurs spread, Ruth felt a flicker of hope expanding within her. Maybe, just maybe, they could change the narrative in this office. Maybe she could stand tall, but then, from the corner of the room, a soft voice chimed in, "This isn't the way to win people over, you know. Be careful, or you'll isolate yourselves more." The cynical comment had the effect of icy water poured over a fire, dousing the warmth of their conversation. Margaret glanced at Ruth, unsure of what to say next. Would this newfound courage withstand the scrutiny? Was their fragile bond strong enough to brave the tides of ridicule and misunderstanding? As the atmosphere thickened with uncertainty, both women felt the weight of expectation pressing down on them. "I don't want to fight alone," Ruth admitted softly, vulnerability surfacing again. Margaret's heart ached for her. "You won tea," she whispered fiercely. But could they keep that promise in a place that thrived on division and elitism? As they exchanged a glance filled with determination, Margaret knew this was just the beginning. The battle would not be easy, and victory was never guaranteed. The real question was, could they turn this moment of vulnerability into something powerful enough to transform their lives forever? The tension hung thick in the air, wrapping around the group like a suffocating cloak. Ruth's heart raced, each beat striking against the silence that followed her declaration. Her palms felt clammy, and she could sense the eyes of her co-workers boring into her skin, awaiting either her retreat or her defiance. "What do you want from us, Ruth?" the blonde asked, a smirk playing on her lips as if belittling the very notion that Ruth could challenge them. "You're making a scene for nothing." Ruth took a breath, her chest rising in defiance. "I want respect. I want to be treated as an equal, not as the punchline of your jokes." Margaret felt the heat of Ruth's words. It was powerful, electrifying in a way that transcended the uncomfortable atmosphere. In that moment, she recognized a spark of transformation not just in Ruth, but stirring within herself too. They were fighting for more than just dignity, it was self-acceptance on a grand scale. "I mean, what's next? You'll start giving speeches about how we should all be nicer to each other?" Another voice chimed in, harshly cynical, mocking. "Yes," Ruth shot back, her confidence deepening. "Yes, that is exactly what I'm saying. We need to understand each other, not belittle each other." For a second, the room hung in a suspended state. Ruth's words cut through the cynicism like a hot knife through butter. Margaret caught glimmers of hope in the expressions around her, confusion, hesitation, and just possibly, a flicker of consideration. "Let's be honest," the blonde challenged, raising her eyebrows in an attempt to reclaim her authority. "If we all started treating each other like snowflakes, we'd just be a bunch of people too afraid to have fun." Ruth stepped closer to her, embodying the fire of her convictions. "You call it fun. I call it cruel. You throw your laughter around like confetti, but it cuts deep. I'm not afraid to stand up against it anymore. What's wrong with being genuine, creating a space where we can all be ourselves?" Suddenly, an older man from the back piped up. "She's right. I've felt it too. It's always the same crowd making jokes at others' expense." His voice trembled a little, but the courage within him was palpable. "I just didn't know how to say it." Margaret's heart swelled. Here it was, a domino effect of realization. Could their little stand in this office spark a movement? What if Ruth's courage inspired others to relate their own experiences? "Okay, let's say we apologize," the blonde said incredulously, seeking to regain control of the narrative. "What do we do after? Just be nice? What's next?" Ruth felt the weight of that question. "Maybe we start by listening. Maybe we have conversations instead of jokes. It's as simple as caring to understand." Margaret's stomach fluttered at Ruth's vulnerability. Here was a woman who had battled her own demons, standing tall against a wall of indifference. She squeezed Ruth's arm. "You're stronger than you know." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. The tide was turning. Ruth noticed a woman from the corner of the room, nodding, even smiling softly. "Let's try it," the older man ventured again, emboldened by Ruth's bravery. "What's the worst that can happen if we choose kindness first? We might just make this office a better place to work." Ruth took another step forward. They could change the momentum. It starts small. Let's say one nice thing about each other every day. Just to start. As around the room, faces softened, Margaret held her breath, watching hope blossom where despair had once thrived. But beneath the excitement was the gnawing worry. What if tomorrow brought the same old jokes? What if Ruth's efforts were met with resistance? Courage to change isn't just a one-time thing, she whispered to Ruth, who looked over, her eyes reflecting a mix of trepidation and hope. "Yeah, but if we don't try, then nothing changes at all," Ruth replied, her determination evident. As laughter faded and a budding camaraderie stirred, Margaret felt the outlines of a new beginning sketch themselves against the backdrop of their previous battles. This was a moment and they needed to hold on to it, but deep down within her, a question lingered: what if their moment of courage wasn't enough to withstand the harsher realities that lay ahead? Would they be able to keep that fire alive? The following day, the atmosphere in the office felt different. There was a subtle shift, a slight easing of tension as the usual banter was replaced by more deliberate conversations. Ruth walked in with her heart pounding. Each step felt like an act of bravery, an echo of the previous day's courage. She knew they had decided to try. "Good morning." Someone called cheerfully from near the break room, and Ruth turned to see a young intern with a smile on her face. It wasn't the usual begrudging greeting she had grown accustomed to. "I really liked what you said yesterday. I've been thinking about it a lot." "Thanks," Ruth replied, surprised that her words had landed with someone. It was a small victory, but it brightened her day. As the coffee maker sputtered to life, the office buzzed with small exchanges. The older man who had spoken up before now joined a couple of co-workers, discussing projects and ideas. Ruth longed to join, but old insecurities held her back. Margaret caught sight of Ruth from across the room and, sensing her hesitation, crossed over. "You're doing great. It's like everyone is actually paying attention now." "Yeah, but will it last?" Ruth's voice wavered. The optimism she felt yesterday was now tangled with anxiety. What happens when the novelty wears off? Margaret's brow furrowed. "I guess we just keep showing up. Today is a new day. Let us see how far we can go with this." Their conversation was interrupted by a familiar voice. The blonde with the smirk walked up to them, her expression unexpectedly neutral. "Hey, I owe you an apology, Ruth." Ruth raised an eyebrow, unsure of how to respond. "I guess I didn't realize how harsh I've been. I'm sorry. I'll try to do better." There was a sincerity behind her words that made Ruth hold her breath. "Thanks," Ruth said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That means a lot." The blonde nodded, looking almost vulnerable for a brief moment before she turned and walked away. Margaret reached out, squeezing Ruth's arm again. "See? Maybe this is working." But just as hope began to take root, the sharp voice of another colleague pierced through the growing warmth. "Apologies? Please. This is all just a phase. It won't last." The voice dripped with skepticism, settling like a weight in the room, pushing down the excitement. Ruth felt her heart plummet. Could they really change this culture? Did they have the power to create a genuine community, or were they just delaying the inevitable? "Don't listen to that. It's fear talking," Margaret whispered, her eyes fierce. "The hardest fights are often the ones that matter most." That sentiment wrapped itself around Ruth, a lifeline amidst her thoughts. Later that afternoon, a group gathered around the break room table. They were sharing stories, laughter breaking the ice in a way Ruth had never seen before. Someone mentioned a recent trip, and as they talked, the harsh judgment seemed to fade away. Feeling emboldened, Ruth joined in, sharing her own experiences. It wasn't easy, insecurity still whispered doubts in her mind. But each kind response bolstered her confidence. Even the skeptical coworkers stood nearby, their expression unreadable yet curious. As the day drew to a close, Ruth felt a strange sense of belonging. Maybe they could create a culture of understanding if they continued to pave their way forward. "What do you think happens next?" Margaret asked as they left the building. Ruth took a deep breath. "I think it's up to us. We either sink back into old ways, or we keep pushing for change." Margaret smiled, the weight of the day lifting. "We can try, right? Just like yesterday?" "Yes," Ruth affirmed, her hope reigniting. But as they walked away, a nagging thought remained. What would happen when they faced real adversity? Would the fragile progress they made hold strong when tested? The world outside buzzed with life, unaware of the trials ahead. But Ruth's heart pounded with determination. She was ready to fight, even if it meant facing the unknown. Would they all rise together or fall apart? The next morning, Ruth walked into the office feeling the familiar flutter in her stomach. But today, it felt different, filled with anticipation rather than dread. She took a deep breath, mentally preparing herself to dive back into the fray, ready to fight for something bigger than herself. As she entered, the office buzzed with chatter. Her co-workers were animated, sharing stories and ideas, the atmosphere lighter than it had been in ages. Ruth couldn't help but smile at the sight. Each laugh echoed her heart's rhythm, a soundtrack promising that yesterday's brave steps hadn't been in vain. "Look who's here!" someone called out as Ruth approached the break room. It was the young intern again, waving her over with enthusiasm. "We were just discussing your ideas from yesterday. They're really inspiring." Ruth felt her cheeks warm, the genuine excitement latching onto her like a featherweight trophy. "Oh, wow, thanks," she stammered, touched. The intern's admiration dispelled another layer of her anxiety. Urging her forward, she joined the circle, eager to engage. Sharing her own insights about collaboration and support, Ruth saw heads nodding. People were actually listening, and for a moment, she felt powerful in that small room, her confidence swelling in tandem, but the joy was quickly punctured by that same skeptical voice from the previous day. What's next? A motivational poster. It was a jab, the speaker's face a mask of disdain. Ruth's heart sank momentarily, but then, clear as day, Margaret stepped in. "You know what? Maybe we could use a little inspiration. It's not easy to provoke change, and we have to start somewhere." Her tone was steadfast, a shield for Ruth that calmed the fiery sting of doubt. Surprisingly, others began to rally. "Yeah," someone chimed in. "Let us create a poster." "Why not?" Ruth found herself grinning. A group discussion about creativity broke out, ideas flowing, laughter returning. Could they truly be building something here? Mid-morning, the office manager announced an all-hands meeting for the end of the week, with talk about a new initiative, something focused on valuing contributions and creating a supportive environment. Ruth's pulse quickened at the implication. This was a genuine chance to make real changes. The day passed in a whirl of excitement and brainstorming. Ruth exchanged glances filled with unspoken thoughts with Margaret. Together, they could confront those who resisted change, armed with passion and purpose. As the sun dipped low, casting a warm glow over the office, Ruth reflected on how far they had come in such a short time. She felt a renewed sense of hope and camaraderie, the faint flicker of possibility burning brighter. Yet, in the corners of her mind, questions loomed. Would they be able to withstand the weight of resistance when the stakes rose? Taking the stairs out, Ruth found herself at the building's south rooftop terrace, the city sprawling below. "Hey," a voice interrupted her thoughts. It was the skeptical colleague, looking less intimidating than before. "I wanted to say, maybe I was too quick to judge. It's hard to change culture." "Thanks for saying that," Ruth replied, sincerity wrapping around her words. "It's not easy for any of us." They stood in silence, the city's hum serving as their backdrop. But just as Ruth hoped they could bridge gaps between them, a firm knock echoed from behind her, the door flung open. The boss stepped through, his face lined with worry. "We need to talk about the upcoming meeting, there's some news." Ruth's heart dropped. What could it be? Suddenly, the hopeful air felt heavy with uncertainty. Would the meeting be a turning point, or would it threaten everything they had built? With dread mingling with determination, she turned to face this new obstacle. What awaited them could change everything they fought for. The room felt smaller as Ruth turned to face her boss, who now stood with an expression that sent a shiver down her spine. What news could be so urgent? She took a deep breath, her pulse quickening as she tried to gauge the mood in the room. "Everyone gather around," he called, his voice rising just above the distant sounds of the city below. A nervous energy swept through the office as colleagues exchanged curious glances, reluctantly abandoning their tasks and clustering around Ruth and her boss. Ruth's mind raced. What could be more important than the meeting they had been eagerly preparing for? There was a sense of weight in the air, like dark clouds rolling in before a storm. She noticed Margaret's concerned look, they had all invested so much into the potential changes that lay ahead. "I have some difficult news to share," he began, his gaze darting from face to face, the tension unmistakable. Ruth's heart sank further. "There have been some significant budget cuts announced from upper management." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Ruth felt her stomach twist. She had feared this. A knot of dread tightened in her chest. How could they introduce a new initiative if they were losing resources? She exchanged a worried glance with Margaret, who clenched her jaw. "I know this is daunting," the boss continued, "but we're not losing hope. While some positions will unfortunately be affected, we're tasked to focus on our core strengths. Let us ensure we're channeling our efforts into a supportive environment. This is more important now than ever." But Ruth couldn't quite grasp how they would support one another with dwindling resources. The sinking whirlpool of anxiety made it hard to concentrate on his words. She wanted to shout, to demand answers, to rouse that passion she had felt earlier in the day. But as she opened her mouth to speak, no sound emerged. The colleague who had challenged her earlier spoke up. "What does this mean for the new initiative?" he asked, and Ruth felt a surge of gratitude for his courage. "That's for us to decide," their boss replied, his tone somewhat firmer now. "However, it's crucial we stand together and keep morale up." A silence fell over the group, palpable and thick. Ruth's mind started spinning. How could they keep morale high when everything felt so precarious? Would everyone still rally behind creativity and support? Would they fight for their ideas? Margaret reached out to Ruth's arm, squeezing it gently. In that simple gesture, Ruth found a weak flicker of strength. This wasn't over. They had worked too hard, come too far to let darkness slip in unnoticed. "Hey," she finally managed to say, breaking the spell of silence. "We can still make a difference, even with fewer resources. If we're as committed as we've been, but who will listen to a bunch of discouraged employees now?" Came another voice, laced with skepticism. It struck hard, piercing through Ruth's resolve momentarily. Was she just being foolish, an idealist clinging to dreams in the face of reality? Yet something pushed her forward. "I believe in what we stand for," she insisted, her voice gaining volume and confidence. "If we want to create a culture of support, we have to show it, even when things are tough. It starts with us. And if we believe it, others will too." People began murmuring, some nodding. Ruth felt renewed energy sparking between them. Perhaps they could still foster collaboration. Fewer resources didn't have to mean a lack of spirit. Maybe this was their chance to show resilience. As the discussion continued, the hope she had fought so hard to keep ignited again. But even as she smiled, a nagging question loomed. Were they about to embark on a journey through uncertainty, or was this where their fire would finally flicker out? Before she could explore those thoughts, the boss's phone rang sharply, interrupting the meeting. He glanced at the screen, his brow furrowing again. "I need to take this," he said, stepping away. The atmosphere shifted once more. Ruth felt that familiar flutter of anxiety creeping back. What would he reveal? Would it be more bad news, or could it perhaps be an unexpected opportunity? As she watched him slip away, Ruth's heart raced with the uncertainty that lay ahead. This new chapter was just beginning, and the stakes had never felt higher. With the stakes unfolding rapidly, was there a chance that they could turn this setback into something remarkable? Ruth stood at the edge, peering into the abyss of uncertainty. The air thick with tension felt heavy on her chest. Every heartbeat echoed a truth she couldn't ignore. They were at a crossroads, and secretly, hope flickered amid doubt. The door might close, but she felt a fire igniting within her, a tenacity she desperately wanted to embody. As the murmurs grew quieter, and her coworkers settled into an uneasy silence, Ruth drew a deep breath. The hesitant nods around her encouraged her to press on. "We can't afford to back down now. If we really want change, it starts right here, right now." Each word landed with a conviction that surged with every syllable. Life isn't just about resources, it's about our attitudes. We have to show that we're united, that we care for one another, especially when times get tough. Margaret's eyes sparkled with fierce pride. Ruth felt that familiar warmth radiate between them. We can inspire change, not because we have everything we need but because we genuinely want to grow and uplift each other. Let us pledge to be more than our roles. To support, to listen, and to act with kindness. A hesitant employee interjected, but it's hard to rally everyone when people are scared for their jobs. True, Ruth replied, her heart racing. But if we start sharing small wins and recognize our values, it can shift the atmosphere. It could give us the fuel to work brighter, even if our resources dwindle. The ripple effect of her words resonated. An unexpected ally piped up, a usually cynical colleague who had laughed at Ruth's previous struggles. Maybe we can find ways to support each other with what we're passionate about. They stared at her, surprised. Exactly. Ruth shouted, excitement bubbling over. If we harness our strengths and offer support, we can forge ahead. Everyone has something to contribute. What if we celebrate our differences instead of hiding behind them? The room buzzed with higher energy, ideas began to surface. Margaret leaned closer to Ruth, energized. Let us start a weekly circle where everyone shares something they're proud of or a way they've helped someone else. Yes. Ruth agreed, her heart soaring. One kind word can change a day, and recognizing the value we each bring can create a shift. People don't need tangible resources, they need a reason to believe that their efforts matter. An unexpected voice chimed in, a junior intern who had barely spoken before. I love sharing my art, how about an open mic day? It can lighten the mood and bring us together. The group started buzzing with ideas, a sense of camaraderie developing. Tension melted away, replaced by a collective inhale of anticipation. They could forge something together, community over complacency. Ruth felt a swell of determination filling her. Let us set our experiences against the tide of animosity. She caught Margaret's eye, proud of the teammate beside her. We'll lift each other up, no matter what we face together. Margaret nodded, both of their visions glimmering with promise. They didn't need to wait for permission, they had each other, and that was enough. As they turned their eyes back to the boss, returning to the room, there was an uneasy silence again, but this time, it bristled with possibility. Ruth noticed the shift, a glimmer of courage shining in her coworker's eyes, ready to hear what he had to say. When he re-entered, he cleared his throat. I think we need to talk about the adjustments we can make despite budget cuts. Ideas from yesterday inspired me. Let us brainstorm ways to keep morale high but also to invest in what truly matters. Ruth's heart raced. Could they communicate and reshape this moment? Let us talk about what Ruth and Margaret have suggested, he continued. If we believe this is worth fighting for, then maybe we can start fostering this change in our culture now. It's about community. The once stifled room felt electric. Hope charged the air like static, igniting discussions that filled the space with resilience. Ruth smiled at Margaret, feeling exhilarated. As the boss continued, Ruth's heart surged. Not just for herself or Margaret, but for everyone they're standing together, head held high, orchestrating a symphony of support against the noise of doubt. This was more than an office, it was a movement. In that defining moment, Ruth knew they had the power to shape their narrative, to weave new threads of understanding into the fabric of their workplace. A new journey was unfolding, one where laughter no longer stung but lifted them up. They could create a culture based on respect, understanding, and humor that didn't come at anyone's expense. With an unwavering heart, Ruth faced the horizon of their shared journey ahead. The path wouldn't always be smooth, but together, they could rise. A new dawn awaited, and just like that, a flicker of hope turned to a radiant flame. Now is the time to be part of this movement. Subscribe immediately to the channel to not miss the next exclusive stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help uplift these vital narratives. Comment your reactions and feelings about this inspiring ending. Share instantly this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this transformation. You need to show your support. Don't wait not even one more second to share.